Our next deadly psychological sin is probably the deadliest: bitterness. Someone once said that bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. Often when we're hurt by another individual or group of individuals, we begin to think excessively about that situation. We suffer an emotional wound, and it takes time for us to process through that. So some thinking about it is okay, but there's a certain point where we're starting to think about it too much and it begins to consume us. And we call that rumination, when a certain situation fills our thoughts. What often happens with people that have fallen into bitterness is they may end those relationships, they may cut those off. But as they move forward in their lives, because that bitterness is not resolved, they will actually find another situation that is very similar to that situation to carry on the legacy, because they have unfinished business, so to speak. We can potentially become really mean, angry, negative people through bitterness. It's very interesting. A study was done on the effect of all things, Botox on mental health. Can you believe it? Botox impacts mental health, not just because it makes people think they look better, but because those expressions around the eyes, the furrowed brow and so forth, can have a reflexive effect on our psyche, on our emotional life. So these individuals were given Botox around the eyes, and it was found that 47% of their depressive symptoms were relieved over a 16-week period. The replacement for bitterness, it's very simple: forgiveness. Let me tell you a story. In 2006, a man named Charles Carl Roberts walked into an Amish school and shot 5 Amish schoolgirls in cold blood. Then he shot and killed himself. The amazing thing about this story is that the compassion from the Amish community toward an act that would normally call forth all the vengeance and anger of human nature, the compassion actually flowed more freely than the blood. Only hours after the shooting, an Amish neighbor appeared at the Roberts home to comfort the family. Visits were paid to his widow, parents, and in-laws. One Amish man spent nearly an hour with Robert's sobbing father in his arms. Finally, 30 Amish attended the killer's funeral. One Amish man said, "I don't think there's anybody here that wants to do anything but forgive." One of the reasons people hesitate to forgive is that they confuse forgiveness with other things. Let me tell you what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not excusing what that person did, nor is it approving of what they did. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. You don't necessarily have to enter into a relationship with that person. That's not always safe, not always advised. Forgiveness and trust are related, but they are not the same thing. Separate forgiveness out from those things and define forgiveness clearly in your mind. Forgiveness is you releasing your right to hurt that other person the way that they hurt you. Now, we could argue that nobody has a right to hurt anyone under any circumstances, but in our minds, we assume we have the right to hurt another if they've hurt us. Forgiveness is the voluntary releasing of that right. Sociologic research shows that those who understand their own sinfulness, their own capacity for hurting others, are actually measurably more inclined to forgive. So if you're having trouble forgiving someone, remember times when you've hurt another. Carl Menninger said that if he could convince patients in psych hospitals that their sins were forgiven, 75% of them would walk out the next day. When we accept that we've been forgiven, we are going to be much more inclined to be able to forgive others. See, forgiveness is a two-way street. I receive forgiveness from God and from others for the things that I've done, and I bestow forgiveness upon others. I know in some ways this way of life seems irrational. We all have this justice bone inside of us, this sense of justice, and we feel it needs to be fulfilled. But good counsel says leave that in God's hands and choose to forgive. It'll be better for your health, for your mental health, and for your spiritual life.